All right, so we're going to talk about using quotes today, how to put quotes and what paraphrasing looks like and that kind of thing. So that is in this paper setup using quotes in MLA format help folder. And there is a video called integrating quotations, but since you know video playback doesn't work very well, that is actually part of your daily attendance question today. It's a really quick video about really easy ways to integrate your quotations. So you do need to watch that as part of your daily attendance question today. And it'll only take you a few minutes. Meanwhile, here's how to format your quotes and paraphrases, okay? So I'm going to click on that and open that document, which means now I need to switch my screen. So hold please. Okay. Okay, so you should see, and I'm going to stop sharing my camera so that that screen can be bigger. Okay. Can you guys all see that screen?
Let me get out there too.
Okay. So short quotes versus long quotes. A short quote is any quote that's less than 4 full lines of typed text in your paper. Most of what you're doing, if you're quoting material, most of your quotes should fall into this category. If most of your quotes are actually long quotes, then you need to rethink what you're quoting and try to paraphrase a little bit more or quote a little bit less, okay? So for a short quote, you're going to follow these steps. Integrate or blend the quote into your own sentence structure to provide a context for the quote. Put quotation marks around the quoted material. Include an in-text parenthetical citation immediately after the end of the quote. Place the period or other punctuation after the citation, and always discuss the relevance of the quoted material in the next sentence. So what does that look like? Okay, and this should all be pretty familiar to you from what you've learned previously in English classes. So this is what it looks like. In the teen genre film, in the teen genre of film, the directors do not dramatize the actual events, but how things feel, the emotional coloring of memory. The directors deliberately play on the audience's emotions by showing the intensity of the situation on the individual character, not the reality of the situation itself. Okay, so notice you can't really hear where the quote starts or stops. It just blends right into the context of my words, my sentences, right? And that's what we mean by integrated or blended quote. It doesn't say in the teen genre of film, the directors do not dramatize the event. A quote that shows this is how things feel, the emotional coloring of memory, right? So I don't say the word quote, and I don't say this quote shows that. I don't say that. I just immediately talk about what that means, and I contextualize it so it makes sense. The quotation marks are around the quoted material. The period comes after the citation. And the citation is Denby, who's the author, and there's a page number because this was from a book source, okay? So that's what that looks like. You blend the quote into your own sentence structure to provide a context, which is what I do leading into the quote. Put quotation marks around the quoted material, as evidenced there, and then include an in-text parenthetical citation immediately after the quote. Put the period after the end of the citation, and then I discuss the relevance of that quote afterwards, okay? If you string together a bunch of quotes, quote after quote after quote, it's gonna make it look like you don't actually know what you're talking about, and that's really bad. So you wanna make sure that you are contextualizing the quote and explaining the quote, okay? For a long quote, This is any quote of 4 or more full lines of typed text in your paper. You use these only when you have to. Otherwise, it's going to look like you're relying too much on your sources and don't have enough of your own ideas to share. So typically in a paper like this, you might only have 1 or 2 long quotes. If you have more than 1 or 2 long quotes, then you definitely need to think about paraphrasing your material or quoting less. Okay? So you're going to follow these steps. You're going to integrate or blend the quote into your own sentence structure to provide a context, just like you would for a short quote. However, you're going to put a colon at the end of your introduction and then begin a new line and tab indent the entire quote. You don't use quotation marks around the quoted material, but you still use an in-text parenthetical citation immediately after the end of the quote. In the long quote, the period goes before the citation, not after the citation. And then you still need to explain and discuss the relevance of the quoted material, but you're going to start that on a new line back at the original 1-inch margin. So what does that look like in your paper? In the teen genre of film, the directors do not dramatize the actual events, but instead how things feel. Notice the colon, the new line, and the tab indent of the whole quote. The emotional coloring of memory. They fix subjectivity into fable. At actual schools, there is no unitary system of status. There are many groups to be a part of, many places to excel or fail to excel, many avenues of escape and self-definition. And often the movies, too, revel in the arcana of high school cliques. Humiliation is the most vivid emotion of youth, so in memory, it becomes the norm. So that extends that initial quote into a long quote. Notice I introduce it with my own words, but then I put a colon after the introduction and start the quote on a new line, tab indenting the whole entire quote. Notice, because this is multiple sentences, the period goes before the citation. And then here's the citation. Again, this is the author's last name. It's the first item of the works cited entry. And then there's a page number because it is a print source. Obviously, if you have an online source, it's not paged, so you don't need that. And then I explain the quote back on the original 1-inch margin, not tab indented. The directors deliberately play on the audience's emotions by showing the intensity of the situation of the individual character, not the reality of the situation itself. This carries through the many stereotypes within the teen film genre, one of the most common of which is the emotion of humiliation. Okay? So that's how you would do a long quote. Okay? So hopefully, since this short quote and this long quote are based on the same thing, you can see the difference pretty vividly. The common things, you want to make sure you're introducing the quote, leading into it with your own words, explaining the relevance of the quotation afterwards, also in your own words. And notice you're never using the word quote or quotation. Okay, it's obvious that that's what we're talking about, so just explain it. Okay, so what does it look like when that material is paraphrased? So when you paraphrase something, you don't just swap out a couple of words, you put it all into your own words. Okay, so here is what I was saying in both of those examples, but it's all paraphrased. Okay, and I'm still explaining and connecting. Okay, that's the important part of including research. You're able to, as the researcher and the writer, you are able to explain and connect that information from your research. In the teen genre of film, the directors do not dramatize the actual events, but the lasting memories of the feelings of those events instead, particularly the most impactful emotion, humiliation. The directors deliberately play on the audience's emotions by showing the intensity of the situation on the individual character, not the reality of the situation itself. This carries through the the many stereotypes within the teen film genre, one of the most common of which is the emotion of humiliation. And again, so the only accident here, and I just saw this, there shouldn't be a period there, but the period goes after for a paraphrased example. The period goes after the citation, and this is a mistake, so I apologize about that. But hopefully you can see in these examples the difference between a short quote and a long quote and what that paraphrased material actually looks like. Do you guys have any questions?